Hello, I'm Ted Leverette, broadcasting from partneroncall.com. I'm the original business buyer advocate. For more than 30 years, I've been helping people find and buy the right businesses the right way. Our topic today is how cybersecurity risk affects owners and buyers of small and mid-sized businesses. You're hearing this because too many people buying and selling small and mid-sized businesses are not considering cyber risks, and they're not doing it early enough, if at all. So you're about to get a reality check from my interview with Justin Daniels, an M&A transaction attorney in Atlanta with Baker Donaldson. Justin Daniels will cover some of the risks and what we can do about it. Our focus is mostly on acquirers, the searchers trying to buy the right business the right way. This podcast may also help owners, sellers, brokers, advisors, and others sooner rather than later to think more seriously about cyber risk. Oh, and for you searchers, what you hear today gives you a heads up so you can much earlier mitigate, avoid, or walk away from what could become disastrous acquisitions. So Justin, get our attention. What's the point?
Cybersecurity risk on an M&A deal can end up costing you more than the purchase price that you paid for the business.
Holy cow.
So think about this for a minute. You paid $4 million for a business and you inherit a cyber risk that causes you problems with the customers that you purchased the business for of $8 million. Not only have you now paid for a business that doesn't have value, now you're in the negative territory. And that can happen when you are not doing your due diligence from a cybersecurity perspective when you go to buy a business.
You know, Justin, before we started this recording, you sort of set the stage, sort of like a foundation. You said there were three big questions relating to cyber. And could you cover those now? Because I think our listeners would like to hear those.
Sure. So, when you're one of the searchers for a business and you have that initial conversation and you're, indicating interest and you want to start, kicking the tires and on your due diligence, there's three questions for cybersecurity that you're going to ask. One, hey seller, do you have a schematic of your network? And in that schematic, it shows how data flows through the network. Second thing you're going to ask, who is the sole point of responsibility for cybersecurity in your business? And third, does this seller have a written information security plan to address cybersecurity?
Justin, I've been working for people buying small and mid-sized businesses for over 30 years. And until just recently, we almost never thought of this stuff. And now that I'm getting more aware of it, we don't see this kind of stuff when we're asking owners. Until today, I didn't have these three questions, but we've sort of segued into it, and they look at us like, what's the point? Could you elaborate on some of those questions, and especially for our listeners searching for or trying to buy a company?
Be happy to. So let's drill down a little bit on the three questions. And I will tell you, typically, when you ask these three questions, they're not going to have any answers for you. And again, they're going to look at you a little quizzically and be like, why are you asking all these questions? So let's start with question number one. Why is it important to know how the network is configured, what's attached to it, and how data flows through it? Simple answer. If you don't even know what assets are on the network, then how do you even know what threats there are out there? Or there may be things attached to the network that have malware or have problems that you don't even know about because the seller can't even tell you what is or isn't attached to their network. Fundamental baseline question. Second, what is the biggest asset most companies have nowadays? People might say, oh, it might be customers or IP. And I would suggest to everyone in the audience, it's data. As you buy these businesses in the 21st century, the huge trend is how do you build this lake of data about your customers? How are you going to use techniques and technology like AI to take all of this data and make inferences or conclusions about your customers that you hadn't thought about before, that gives you new ways to target and market to them? But as part of this innovation with data and where it's taking us, now you've got these privacy laws like the new California law, the European GDPR law. So now when you're acquiring a business, I got to think about, hey, what are your practices when it comes to data privacy, and are you compliant? Or alternatively, do I want to acquire your customers so that I can market to them in a different way that makes the business more profitable? But am I now doing it in a way where I'm not compliant with these privacy laws, and now I'm going to take the acquisition and have a problem because now I don't understand what customer data there is, how it flows through the network, and how I'm going to comply with some of these privacy laws. And in California, you can get fined up to $2,500 per violation. So think about that. If you have 100 or even 1,000 or 10,000 people, that mounts really quickly. Second question is, who is responsible for cybersecurity? Well, in most companies, oh, my IT guys handle that as kind of like a footnote. Well, the thing is, the IT function in your company, or a lot of small, medium business may outsource it, is they're supposed to keep your computers running. They're not necessarily tasked with figuring out, oh, where are the vulnerabilities? Where might someone have clicked on a phish email that injected malware into the network? So if you don't have a single point of responsibility for cyber, what's going to happen? Nobody seems to be responsible for it. Nobody's thinking about it. Doesn't get reported up into the decision maker, depending on how big the company is. And that's yet another opportunity for the system to break down, and you have a cyber data breach, or I can't tell you how much challenge, and they don't necessarily have the same resources of large companies. In our topic today, with M&A is a real inflection point when you're going to buy a business where cyber risk can really come to the forefront. As you pointed out in our intro, cyber risk could cause you not to buy the business. Cyber risk could cause you to change the price that you're willing to buy the business for. Cyber risk could cause you to say, hey, seller, you're going to hold back X additional dollars of purchase price in an escrow fund until I'm, satisfied that the cyber risk isn't there. And what's interesting about cyber risk, the average amount of time from the time they initially get into your system to where you figure it out is almost 200 days. So you can have a situation, and I'll use a public example, is Neiman Marcus was acquired. I think they have a Neiman Marcus in your parts. You may have been there. So Neiman Marcus was purchased in June or July by a private equity group. Didn't really do much cyber due diligence, didn't find anything, bought the company, great. So guess what happens during Christmas season? Well, what do you think might happen during Christmas season that could be a problem for a retailer when it comes to a hack?
Well, if they're shut down, that blocks the ordering. And if they get hacked in, you get all those customers who are providing confidential information to buy products.
More specifically, they got a hold of credit card data and gift cards, and they started using them.
Oh, my God.
They waited for the holiday season because they'd been in the system for a while. And so when people hack into your system, it's not like they want to make a huge, let the band play and announce their arrival. Oh, they want to get in and they want to be quiet. Let me give you another good example. I had a client who the hacker impersonated the owner of the company, because you can get a lot of people's email right off of, their company website. You can get mine that way. They impersonated the owner, and they were watching the traffic, and they saw that an invoice was about to be paid. And they basically spoofed an email from the owner of an invoice for a different vendor, and the controller just paid it. It was like $100,000. and the invoice looked legitimate, the email looked legitimate, and they had no way of knowing. Because the single biggest risk that you're going to have in an acquisition, the most likely kind of cyber attack, you talked about ransomware, it's phishing that leads to wire fraud.
Yikes.
And one of the things that you can do in due diligence is you should be able to ask the question, talk to me a little bit about how you wire money or get payments from customers. And if they can't show you a policy and procedure where they never, ever, ever, do not ever do this, wire money based on an email.
This relates to that question, that number 3 you're getting to about because I was wondering, we can't just settle for an owner saying, oh, yes, we do those things. That's why that third question is, do you have a written information security plan? Because that's not only a guide, but I suppose that's something that gets used in a purchase contract, maybe as in the warranties and representations, yes?
So let's talk about that for a minute.
Okay.
So just because the reason you ask for a written information security plan is you want to see if they've even thought about this. If they don't have a written plan, then you know they haven't thought about it at all. Because when it comes to phishing that leads to wire fraud, you'd think they'd have policies and procedures in place that say, okay, if you're going to wire out money, you have to go and get this specific approval or that particular approval such that it can never be done via just email that people can spoof. But if you don't have any kind of written information security plan or written policies and procedures, right there, that ought to be a red flag that the company you're looking to buy hadn't thought about this at all. Even if they have a written information security plan, I've had instances where you can talk about the owner and they wax poetically about their information security plan and how good it is, and then you talk to the people who are the IT folks who actually implement it and do it, and they're like, yeah, that's not worth the paper it's printed on.
Okay, Justin, I have to interrupt because I know right now, listening to this podcast, are people looking to buy a business and business brokers and business owners, and they're all saying game's over. So I'm just thinking about all these small business owners. When they're asked these questions, they're going to look at us dumbfounded. Do our buyers just walk away? And if they do, that's going to probably eliminate 90% of the opportunities. Are there some things we can do knowing these things are missing, somehow hook into the owner?
So let's try to step into the practical world here.
Okay.
So cybersecurity is something that has to be managed like a lot of other risks. When you buy a business and it has 3 or 4 big customers, you're taking a risk that you can maintain those customers. They don't go somewhere else, that you can manage them. Cybersecurity is another one of those risks. So let's use the example of the most important one, which is phishing that leads to wire fraud. Now, if you know a company has nothing in place, then one of the things you're going to have to do post-deal is you're going to want to train the employees so that they know what a phishing email looks like. You're going to want to put in policies and procedures to deal with that. And then another area, and I remember I've read some of your articles that we should touch on, is you do want to have cyber insurance, but too many companies think that's the cure when it's really just a tool in your bag. So what you have to do is identify, okay, I've got some cyber risk. How bad is it? How can I remediate it? Is it the kind where I may want to, change the purchase price, hold more of the purchase price back? That's where you have to come up with, working with experts to kind of help you assess the level of the risk and how can it be mitigated, and does it require any of the things that I was talking about relating to the purchase price? Because one of the very things that you should do is, obviously you can look at policies and procedures, but you'd love to get on the network and actually see what's going on. But if I'm a seller of a business and a buyer wants access to my network, what is your response going to be?
No.
Actually, it's not going to be that. It's going to be hell no. And so what I'm saying to you is obviously you'd like to do as much due diligence as you can, but really what I'm talking about is you have to have a recognition of the issue, factoring it in, doing some due diligence and getting a sense for what issues are presenting themselves here, given the size, the type of industry that you're in. Like, for example, if you told me we were buying an e-commerce business and I'm looking at the assets that I'm buying, that website is the number one asset. So I'm going to try to do some really good due diligence because from a cyber perspective, I'm really concerned about a denial of service attack that takes down that website. If you were to buy my law firm, we have a website, but if that website got taken down, it would be, be a crappy day, but the world, our organization goes on without it. So part of what you have to do when you're doing this diligence and making practical business decision is what are the real value of the assets that you're buying? And then you have to assess the cyber risk not only around that, and then a little bit about the culture, because you may have to re-educate or really educate specifically the employees who may not have cyber foremost in their mind because it wasn't something the owner focused on.
One of the things, the minute we're done taping this, I'm going to do is I'm sending an email to 3 of my clients, one in England and the other 2 in the United States, that are in that place where they're negotiating with the owner on price, and they're trying to work out how much working capital is going to be necessary post-closing. Well, I'm going to tell these guys, my buyers, you need to be talking to some IT people who are expert in this and find out what's a budget where if you can't get in and do diligence before you buy the company, how much cash are you going to need to bring in the talent right away to set up the security you need? That's an add-on that I hadn't thought much about until about 1 minute ago.
So let me give you another one that you should consider when you have those conversations. If you're going to acquire that company, and many times, not all, but many, you're going to get the hell no for access to the network. If you're buying that company and you're going to integrate it with your network, don't. Wait until you do a real deep dive on security so that you don't take the problem on the network of the company that you just acquired and inject it into your company. That's how you make the problem worse than the purchase price you just paid for that company. When you integrate the networks and you haven't done your security diligence to see if there's something on the network or a problem once you have control of it. It's a little bit inconvenient, but I think I'd rather have the inconvenience than integrate a network and not know if I've got some malware or something on there that then infects not only the network that I just bought, but my network that had previously not been infected.
Yikes. And one of my clients is doing a roll-up where he is picking off 2 or 3 businesses, and they were going to put it in the same holding company and blend everything. So we got to really think about that. Yowie.
I mean, think about a client of yours you may have represented who's going to go buy 20 franchises who may have different networks or systems, and he's going to bring all that data and whatnot onto their network. And what if some of that data has malware, or there's an issue with some of the systems that he's bringing into his company? Now you've created a situation where you can infect your entire organization.
Okay, I'm listening. So is everybody else. Keep going.
You talked about reps and warranties, so let's talk about that. I like to call that what I call part of the 4 horsemen of the asset purchase apocalypse, which is reps and warranties, conditions and covenants, and indemnification. Because all 4 of those in an M&A deal, in any kind of purchase agreement, they all work together. You have to understand how they're all interrelated when you're the buyer. So reps and warranties. Here's the kinds of things you should have reps and warranties from a seller on, depending, I'm going to take a middle market kind of deal that you may work on. You want to know that they've had no data breaches. You want to know that they are in compliance with appropriate privacy and security laws. Another interesting rep and warranty is that you may want them to represent and warrant that their vendors are in compliance. Because here's the thing, what is one of the largest methods of cyber attack? It's not going after the company directly. How did Target happen? They got to Target through an HVAC vendor of Target's in Pennsylvania. They got into Target's system and they were able to move laterally and get to their point of sale system and the credit card data. They didn't hack Target directly. They went through the low-hanging fruit of a vendor whose cybersecurity was not so secure. So in the reps and warranties, you probably need to be thinking about what are some of the key vendors in that ecosystem that you may want them to rep and warrant are compliant, cyber secure. They haven't been investigated by any government. You may also want to know if they've done any cybersecurity risk assessments in the last 5 years, and if so, you'd like to copy and review those, because what's going to happen if they have done that? I guarantee you there will be things on there that the risk assessing firm identified that they haven't fixed. And you can make judgments from that, or if they haven't done one in 5 years, that also tells you something. Probably tells you they haven't taken security as seriously as they should, and that may inform the working capital and other things that you may need to remediate or otherwise do your post-closing integration so that you reduce the risk if you choose to go ahead with the deal. So that's kind of looking at the reps and warranties. And here's another thing you got to think about with that. You remember earlier how I said, how long does it take from the time they get in to discover the average breach?
Yeah.
Almost 200 days.
Yeah.
So you have to think about the survival of the rep and warranty relating to data breach and cybersecurity. You've probably seen in some of your deals, there's certain fundamental reps that last for a longer period of time, or the statute of limitations. Those might include things relating to ERISA, environmental, title to the assets. Cybersecurity probably needs to be one of those reps and warranties because you have such a lag time between finding out you've got a problem to when they got in the system. If you recall the Yahoo deal, they knew about it but didn't disclose it, or they didn't figure it out for 2 years. And then the other issue you have with our four horsemen of the asset purchase apocalypse is obviously the ability to indemnify, or the reps and warranties are only as good as the seller's ultimate ability to pay on them. So the question becomes, are you going to put money in a holdback specifically for cyber? Are you, whenever I do an asset deal with a company, you may think long and hard about putting wanting the owner to give a personal guarantee so that you have a pocket there if you have a problem later. You may also want to see what the insurance policy for the seller is, or your insurance policy, to see if you can mitigate some of that risk with insurance. But again, people think insurance is a panacea, when the reality is most people get cybersecurity insurance and don't know what they're purchasing because they don't know what risks they need to insure for and what amount. And they also have brokers who don't know what they're talking about. And let me give you a great example of that. I had a client who had a phishing email that led to a fraudulent wire where they couldn't get the money back of over $600,000-$700,000. They had an insurance policy that had $1 million coverage, but they then had a sublimit for what they called socially engineered emails, which is what phishing is, with a sublimit of $100,000. And when both of those apply, the more specific coverage. So guess what? Don't have $600,000 worth of coverage. So think about how much revenue you have to generate at a lot of companies to have $600,000 in available cash that just went out the door.
Hey, before we started this recording, you said something to me about seatbelts. You said you had a really cool analogy.
Yeah.
What was that?
So here's how I think we should look at cyber risk. And business owners like, I hear a lot about this, but you know what? I want to grow my business. I don't know that cybersecurity helps me grow my business. So let me put it to the audience this way. Think back to the turn of the 20th century. One of the biggest innovations of the 20th century was the car. But when the car first came out through about the 1960s, it didn't have a seatbelt. And then Ralph Nader came along in the 60s and, put seatbelts in cars. Hey, this is the most important safety feature because, cars could start going at 60, 80, 100 miles an hour. And if you get into a wreck at that speed, people can get killed. But from the 60s till, I don't know, I'm going to say the 90s, did people wear seatbelts? I remember my dad never wore a seatbelt. Now, when you go out, how often do you see people not wearing a seatbelt?
Well, not very often.
Right. Why? What happened?
They get a ticket. That's one of the things.
Well, if you recall, I think it was in the 90s, two things happened. They started passing seatbelt laws in different states where, you could get a ticket and get fined if you didn't wear your seatbelt. But it also meant that there was a campaign around, hey, wear your seatbelt and stay alive. So people started to understand that, hey, wearing that seatbelt in a car that can go, really fast was a really important safety function. And why does every car in America now have an airbag? Is it because the manufacturer's like, this is great. This is a competitive advantage to have a airbag in a car to help protect people? No, the government passed a law that required it. And so where we're at with the cyber safety belt for your business is outside of healthcare, where we have HIPAA and Graham-Leach-Bliley for financial services, we've kind of got this cyber seatbelt available to us in our business, but we're not using it. And so as a result, as people can, God forbid, lose their life in a car accident, people and business owners can literally lose their entire economic life from a cyber attack. But they don't want to use their cyber safety belt and the tools available to really largely eliminate or mitigate this risk. A seatbelt maybe can't make you bulletproof if you get into a car accident, but it sure can really go a long way toward mitigating the risk. The cyber safety belt is the exact same thing, but we're in this period where people just don't want to reach for the safety belt for a variety of different reasons.
Justin, let's end on that upbeat, because that ties into how you opened this interview. So Justin Daniels, how can people listening to this now contact you? What's the best way to find you directly?
Well, you can reach me on my website at www.bakerdonaldson.com. But what I would really do is find me on LinkedIn. I'm Justin S. Daniels, because I post 2 or 3 times a week about all kinds of different cyber issues, and it's a great way that I interact with the community to help educate people. And you can find me as Justin S. Daniels on LinkedIn, and I would encourage your listeners to reach out and link to me and get the content that I put out multiple times a week. And then lastly, I speak all over the country on cybersecurity issues, not only in M&A, but operationally, and use it as an opportunity to educate yourself, because as a business owner out there who acquires a business and wants to run it, if you don't take into account cyber risk, it is literally a matter of not if, but when it happens, and it can be catastrophic consequences to the value that you've spent so much time and effort to buy and then build up, and it evaporates that quickly because you weren't prepared to deal with managing cyber risk in your business. And every business, don't care what shape or size you are, you now have to manage that risk. Okay, listeners, go to LinkedIn, because just today I read 2 of those posts from Justin, and both of them were really important. We're going to wrap it up now. I'm going to have a couple of closing remarks, but is there anything else you need to tell us, Justin, to scare us a little more? No, actually, I want to kind of end with a personal piece of help for your viewers.
Okay.
I would recommend that all of your viewers take a couple minutes and go and call your mobile phone carrier and ask them to put on your phone what's called a port freeze. You're like, why do I need a port freeze? Well, one of the ways that hackers can really make your day awful is to call up your mobile carrier and impersonate you and get the mobile carrier to port your phone number to the hacker. Now the hacker has your phone, And we all know that we sometimes get emails, or I'm sorry, texts from our bank and whatnot. So what the hacker can do with your phone number is they find out your email, they email your bank and say, hey, can you text me the reset password link to my phone? And they text it to them because they don't know that someone else has your phone. They reset your password. Now they can get into your password and drain your bank account. They call it SIM swapping. And so as just a public message for the benefit of your viewers personally, you can call up Verizon, AT&T, or whatnot and put a port freeze. So they literally have to call you, or you have a special code that you have to give them in order to do that. And that's a great way to deter people from doing this kind of thing that can result in just awful things to your bank account and the other really personal assets that we all have.
Well, listeners, this is Ted Leverette again. I hope what you just heard is as valuable to you as I know it will be for my clients who are searching and trying to achieve done deals. You can learn more in my book for searchers, How to Prepare Yourself and Find the Right Business to Buy. And my other book helps you achieve worthwhile deals, How to Buy the Right Business the Right Way. You can get my books at my website, partneroncall.com. Oh, and searchers, you can do a much better job finding worthwhile deals if you contact me and we improve your business buyer marketing plan. You'll save time, you'll save money, you'll achieve better deals. All you have to do is what the savviest buyers do. So I'm Ted Leverette, the business buyer advocate with Partner on Call Network. Thanks for listening and best wishes for your prosperity.